June 23rd, 1944. Somewhere in the vast darkness of the mid-Atlantic, a Japanese submarine surfaces alongside a German U-boat. The two vessels rock gently in the swells, their crews working frantically to transfer cargo under the cover of night. Inside the Japanese submarine I-52, there are 112 men, along with 2.2 tons of gold bars, strategic metals, and technical specialists bound for Nazi-occupied France. The rendezvous has been planned for months through encrypted communications that both nations believe to be unbreakable. The Germans hand over an Enigma cipher machine, a Naxos radar detector, and 3 specialists, 2 radio operators named Kurt Schulze and Rolf Behrendt, along with a liaison officer named Kapitänleutnant Alfred Schaefer. Everything proceeds according to plan. What the crews of both submarines do not know is that American codebreakers have been reading their encrypted messages for weeks. High above in the darkness, a Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber from the escort carrier USS Bogue circles silently, its radar painting the surfaced submarines as bright blips on the screen. The pilot, part of Composite Squadron 69, watches as the Japanese submarine begins to dive. He pushes the stick forward and descends toward the swirling water where I-52 disappeared beneath the waves. From his bomb bay drops a small, compact weapon measuring only 7 feet long. It splashes into the Atlantic and immediately begins a slow, circular search pattern beneath the surface. This weapon is listening. 4 hydrophones mounted in its nose are scanning the water for the distinctive sound of submarine propellers. Within seconds, the weapon detects the churning noise of I-52, desperately trying to escape into the depths. It turns toward the sound and begins pursuit at 12 knots, following its prey like a bloodhound tracking a scent through the darkness. The men aboard I-52 never see it coming. They never hear it approaching over the noise of their own machinery. The first indication that something is wrong is a violent explosion that rips through the pressure hull. The submarine shudders, begins taking on water, and within minutes slides toward the ocean floor nearly 3 miles below. All 112 souls aboard perish, including the 3 German specialists who had just boarded moments before. The 2.2 tons of gold, 146 bars worth millions, settles into the abyssal darkness, where it will remain undiscovered for more than 50 years. The weapon that killed them was officially designated the Mark 24 mine, but it was not a mine at all. It was a torpedo, the first air-dropped acoustic homing torpedo in history, and its true nature was one of the most closely guarded secrets of World War II. The men who built it called it FIDO, after the faithful hunting dog that never loses its quarry. The Germans and Japanese called it nothing because they never knew it existed. This is the story of the weapon that hunted Hitler's U-boats from beneath the waves, a technological marvel that went from initial planning to first combat kill in just 17 months, deployed over 300 times across 2 oceans, and kept so secret that the enemy never developed a single countermeasure against it. By the time the war ended, FIDO had sunk 37 submarines and damaged 18 more, helping to break the back of the U-boat campaign that once threatened to strangle Britain into submission. Yet for decades after the war, almost no one outside classified military circles had ever heard of it. To understand why FIDO was so revolutionary, and why its development was pursued with such urgency, we must first understand the desperate situation facing the Allies in the early years of the war. The Battle of the Atlantic was the longest continuous military campaign of World War II, stretching from September 1939 until Germany's surrender in May 1945. It was also perhaps the most critical battle of the entire conflict. Britain, an island nation completely dependent on imports for food, fuel, and war materials, could be starved into defeat without a single German soldier ever setting foot on British soil. Adolf Hitler understood this perfectly. So did Winston Churchill, who later wrote that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. The German submarine fleet, the Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm, operated with devastating effectiveness using wolf-pack tactics. Groups of U-boats would spread across convoy routes, waiting for targets. When one submarine spotted a convoy, it would shadow the merchant ships while broadcasting position reports, calling in other U-boats from across hundreds of miles of ocean. When enough submarines had gathered, they would attack simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming the convoy escorts and slaughtering the defenseless merchant vessels. In the early years of the conflict, the results were catastrophic for Allied shipping. U-boat commanders called the period from July 1940 to October 1940 the first happy time, when inexperienced American coastal defenses allowed German submarines to operate almost unopposed off the eastern seaboard. Tankers and freighters were torpedoed within sight of American beaches, their burning hulks visible from shore. During 1942 alone, German U-boats sank over 6 million tons of merchant shipping worldwide. The losses were so severe that Britain was consuming supplies faster than convoys could deliver them. Fuel stocks grew critically low, and rationing tightened as the import situation worsened. The Allied cause hung by a thread. The fundamental problem facing Allied anti-submarine forces was simple in concept, but seemingly impossible to solve. A submarine on the surface was vulnerable. It could be spotted by aircraft or ships and attacked with guns, bombs, or depth charges. But the moment a U-boat detected an approaching threat, it could crash dive beneath the waves in under 30 seconds, disappearing into the protective darkness of the ocean depths. The Type 7C, Germany's standard patrol submarine, had a rated operational depth of 100 meters and could reach 200 meters or more in emergencies. Once beneath the surface, the submarine became nearly invisible to existing detection methods. Aircraft were theoretically the most effective anti-submarine platform because they could cover vast areas of ocean quickly. But an aircraft attacking a diving submarine faced an agonizing race against time. By the time the pilot spotted the U-boat, estimated its course and speed, maneuvered for attack, and released his weapons, the submarine might be 50 or 100 feet beneath the surface, invisible and invulnerable. Depth charges were unguided weapons that sank at a predictable rate and exploded at a preset depth. They required near-perfect aim to damage a submarine. Miss by a few dozen yards and the U-boat escaped to fight another day. The mathematics were brutal. Studies showed that aircraft depth charge attacks achieved only about a 9% kill rate. 9 out of 10 U-boats survived to continue their attacks on Allied shipping. What the Allies desperately needed was a weapon that could follow a submarine beneath the surface, a weapon that could hunt the hunter through the darkness of the ocean. The concept of such a device had existed in theory for years. Acoustic torpedoes, weapons that could home in on the sound of a target's propellers, had been discussed in naval research circles since the 1930s. But transforming the concept into a working weapon required solving enormous technical challenges that no nation had yet overcome. How do you design a hydrophone sensitive enough to detect a submarine's propellers from hundreds of yards away, yet robust enough to survive being dropped from an aircraft at 200 miles per hour and slamming into the ocean's surface? How do you build a guidance system that can distinguish between the target's noise and the countless other sounds in the ocean, the breaking waves, the biological noise of marine life, the echoes from the thermocline? How do you create electronics that will function reliably in the corrosive saltwater environment? How do you power such a complex device with batteries small enough to fit inside a torpedo body? The answers to these questions began to take shape just 3 days after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. On December 10, 1941, a group of scientists and naval officers gathered at Harvard University's Underwater Sound Laboratory to discuss the feasibility of an air-dropped acoustic homing torpedo. The laboratory, established in June 1941 under the direction of physicist Frederick Vinton Hunt, had been working on various underwater acoustic problems for the Navy. Hunt was a brilliant researcher who had earned his doctorate in physics from Harvard in 1934 and specialized in acoustics. Now he and his team would take on their most ambitious project yet. The meeting brought together representatives from the Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, the National Defense Research Committee, and several major industrial laboratories. The discussion was urgent. Everyone present understood the U-boat threat and the inadequacy of existing weapons. By December 22nd, just 12 days after Pearl Harbor, specifications for the new weapon had been drawn up. The formal program was designated Project 61 under the Office of Scientific Research and Development, coordinated by Vannevar Bush. It received the code name FIDO. The name was chosen deliberately to evoke the image of a faithful dog relentlessly pursuing its prey. FIDO would hunt submarines the way a hunting dog tracks quarry, following the scent, in this case the sound of the target's propellers, until it caught up and struck. Some later suggested the name stood for various acronyms, but in truth, it was simply meant to capture the weapon's hunting nature. British forces, who later received the weapon, preferred a different nickname. They called it Wandering Annie. The development effort involved multiple institutions working in parallel under intense time pressure. Harvard's Underwater Sound Laboratory handled acoustic homing and overall torpedo integration. Bell Telephone Laboratories independently developed a competing guidance system. General Electric designed the propulsion and steering motors. Western Electric, Bell's manufacturing arm, engineered the battery and served as the prime production contractor. The David Taylor Model Basin handled hydrodynamics and hull design. The technical challenges were immense, but the team worked with extraordinary speed. On January 13, 1942, the David Taylor Model Basin was formally tasked with developing the torpedo hull using a modified version of the existing Mark 13 aerial torpedo body as the starting point. The original torpedo design provided a proven aerodynamic and hydrodynamic shape. The challenge was to fit all the new guidance and homing equipment inside, while maintaining proper balance and handling characteristics. Two competing guidance systems were developed simultaneously. Harvard's team, led by Hunt, created what they called a non-proportional system. In this design, the rudder would deflect fully in one direction or the other, based on which hydrophone received the stronger signal. If the left hydrophone heard a louder sound, the rudder deflected fully left. If the right hydrophone was stronger, full right deflection. This created a somewhat erratic path toward the target, with the torpedo weaving back and forth, but it was simple and robust. Bell Telephone Laboratories developed a proportional system under the direction of their acoustic research division. In this design, rudder deflection scaled smoothly, with the difference in signal strength between opposing hydrophones. A small difference produced a small deflection. A large difference produced a large deflection. This created a smoother path toward the target and allowed for more precise final approach geometry. Both approaches showed promise in testing. By late July 1942, each system had demonstrated successful sound-controlled guidance in both horizontal and vertical planes during sea trials. The Navy ultimately selected Bell's proportional system for production, though it incorporated many concepts from the Harvard design. The proportional approach offered better accuracy in the final attack phase, which was critical given the weapon's relatively small warhead. The decision was made, remarkably, before airdrop testing was even complete. Such was the urgency of the U-boat threat that the Navy placed its first production order in June 1942, gambling that the remaining technical problems could be solved before the weapons reached the fleet. The design was frozen in October 1942. A contract for 5,200 units went to Western Electric. And on December 7, 1942, exactly 1 year after the attack that launched America into the war, the first fully functional prototype was successfully test-fired against a simulated target. Production models began reaching operational squadrons by March 1943. The development timeline seemed almost miraculous given the complexity of the technology involved. The finished weapon was compact and elegant in its simplicity. FIDO measured 19 inches in diameter and 84 inches long, about 7 feet. This size allowed it to fit on a standard 1,000-pound bomb rack, meaning any aircraft capable of carrying conventional bombs could be modified to deliver FIDO without major structural changes. It weighed 680 pounds, making it light enough for a single-engine aircraft like the Grumman Avenger to carry alongside other weapons. The warhead contained 92 pounds of HBX high explosive, a mixture of TNT, RDX, aluminum powder, and wax that was specifically designed for underwater detonation. HBX had higher explosive power than pure TNT and created a powerful shock wave that could rupture a submarine's pressure hull even if the torpedo did not strike directly. A contact fuse in the nose would detonate the warhead upon impact with the target. Propulsion came from a General Electric motor driving a single propeller at the torpedo's stern. This motor was widely described in later accounts as similar to an off-the-shelf washing machine motor, and while this description was somewhat exaggerated, it captured the pragmatic engineering philosophy behind the design. The motor was rated at approximately 5 to 5.5 horsepower, and was chosen for its reliability and availability rather than its sophistication. A 48-volt lead-acid battery developed by Western Electric and manufactured by the Electric Storage Battery Company provided 110 amperes for approximately 10 to 15 minutes of operation. This gave FIDO a speed of 12 knots and a range of roughly 4,000 yards, about 2 nautical miles. That 12-knot speed was deliberately calculated. A Type 7C German U-boat could manage approximately 7.5 knots when running submerged on electric motors. FIDO's 12 knots gave it a comfortable margin, enough to chase down and overtake any diving submarine. But this same speed made the weapon completely useless against a surfaced submarine, which could easily outrun it on diesel engines at 17 knots or more. This limitation would become one of the war's most carefully guarded secrets, for reasons that would profoundly shape how the weapon was used in combat. The heart of FIDO was its passive acoustic homing system, truly revolutionary technology for its era. 4 piezoelectric crystal hydrophones were mounted flush in the torpedo's hull at 90-degree intervals, approximately 8 inches behind the nose. These hydrophones generated small electrical signals when compressed by sound waves in the water. They listened for the distinctive sound of a submarine's propeller cavitation, the noisy bubbles created when propeller blades spin fast enough to cause localized boiling of the water at a frequency of approximately 24 kHz. A vacuum tube signal processing array inside the torpedo compared the amplitude differences between opposing hydrophone pairs. The pair mounted at the 90-degree and 270-degree positions governed horizontal steering, controlling the rudder to steer left or right. The pair at the 0-degree and 180-degree positions governed vertical steering, controlling the elevators to steer up or down. The torpedo simply turned toward whichever hydrophone received the strongest signal, continuously adjusting its course to home in on the loudest sound source in the water. The guidance system could detect submarine propeller noise at ranges of up to 1,500 yards under favorable conditions. Upon entering the water from a drop altitude of 200 to 300 feet, at aircraft speeds no greater than 120 knots, FIDO would descend to a preset search depth, initially 50 feet, later increased to 150 feet in production models. If no target was detected during the initial descent, the weapon entered a circular search pattern roughly 150 feet in diameter, spiraling through the water while its hydrophones continuously scanned for propeller noise. When target sound exceeded a certain threshold, acoustic homing took over, and the torpedo broke from its circular pattern to begin pursuit. A critical safety feature prevented FIDO from rising above approximately 30 to 40 feet depth at any point during its run. If the torpedo somehow began to ascend toward the surface, the guidance system would force it back into circular search mode and send it diving again. This ensured the weapon could never accidentally attack a surface vessel, which was crucial for both tactical and security reasons. The aircraft that deployed FIDO included the PBY Catalina flying boat, the B-24 and PB-4Y Liberator heavy bombers, the TB-F and TB-M Avenger torpedo bombers, the British Short Sunderland flying boat, and the Handley Page Halifax bomber. Each aircraft required minor modifications to carry and release the weapon, primarily involving electrical connections for the arming system and modified bomb shackles to handle FIDO's unusual shape and weight distribution. The secrecy surrounding FIDO was extraordinary, even by the standards of wartime classification. The official designation, Mark 24 Mine, was deliberate disinformation crafted at the highest levels of naval intelligence. If German spies or codebreakers intercepted any reference to the weapon, they would picture a passive, floating explosive device of the type navies had used for decades. They would not imagine a self-guided underwater pursuer capable of chasing a submarine through the depths. The mine designation also served a practical bureaucratic purpose. Commander Louis McKeon, a naval reserve officer in the Bureau of Ordnance's Research and Development section, championed classifying the weapon as a mine rather than placing it with the regular torpedo programs. This was a shrewd move. The Bureau of Ordnance's torpedo specialists were mired in the Navy's notorious torpedo reliability crisis of the early war years. The Mark 14 submarine torpedo had suffered from defective magnetic exploders and depth, keeping mechanisms that caused it to run beneath targets or fail to detonate. The torpedo desk was overwhelmed with urgent problems and recriminations. Placing FIDO under a different classification gave the project a clear, unobstructed development path, free from the chaos surrounding conventional torpedo programs. The weapon carried top-secret classification throughout its wartime service. In official after-action reports, it was referred to exclusively as the Mark 24 mine, if it was identified at all. Many reports simply noted that the submarine was attacked and destroyed without specifying the weapon used. Wartime photographs of FIDO are extraordinarily scarce. Aircrews received only need-to-know briefings that covered operational procedures without revealing how the weapon actually worked. They understood that it had to be dropped near a submerging or fully submerged submarine at specific altitude and speed parameters. They practiced the standard two-stage tactic, dropping conventional depth charges first to force the U-boat under, then releasing FIDO to pursue it beneath the waves. The crews were not told exactly how the guidance system functioned, only that it did. The operational restriction against using FIDO on surfaced submarines was itself a security protocol. If a surfaced crew saw the weapon dropped and observed its behavior, they might survive to report what they had witnessed. A damaged submarine might even recover the torpedo for analysis. But a dead submarine on the Atlantic floor could not betray the secret. Every successful FIDO attack eliminated all witnesses along with the target. This created a perfect closed loop of operational security that no amount of traditional intelligence work could penetrate. FIDO entered combat during what historians would later call Black May, the decisive month of May 1943, when the Battle of the Atlantic turned decisively against Germany. That month, approximately 40 U-boats were lost to Allied action, a catastrophic rate that stunned the German naval command and forced Admiral Karl Dönitz to temporarily withdraw his wolf packs from the North Atlantic convoy routes. FIDO was one of several new technologies that contributed to this reversal of fortune. The first successful FIDO attack came on May 12, 1943. Flight Lieutenant John Wright, piloting an RAF Coastal Command Liberator bomber of No. 86 Squadron, based at RAF Ballykelly in Northern Ireland, was providing air cover for convoy HX-237 in the mid-Atlantic when his radar detected a surfaced U-boat. The submarine, U-456, was a Type 7C boat that had been shadowing the convoy and reporting its position to other U-boats gathering for a Wolfpack attack. As Wright's Liberator approached, the U-boat lookouts spotted the aircraft, and the captain ordered an emergency dive. Wright pushed his Liberator into a descent, timing his approach to arrive over the diving submarine at exactly the right moment. He released his FIDO into the swirling water where the conning tower had just disappeared beneath the surface. The weapon entered its search pattern, descended to attack depth, and detected the sound of U-456's propellers as the submarine fled into the depths. It turned in pursuit. The explosion came seconds later, detonating against the submarine's hull. U-456 was severely damaged. The blast had ruptured several compartments and damaged the submarine's diving planes, making it difficult to control depth. The crippled boat struggled to limp away, but it could not surface to make repairs without risking another attack. When the British destroyer, HMS Opportune, arrived in the area, U-456's captain attempted to dive deeper to escape, but the FIDO damage proved fatal. The submarine lost control and sank, taking all 49 members of her crew to their deaths. It was classified as a diving accident, caused by the torpedo damage. 2 days later, on May 14, 1943, the United States Navy scored its first purely American FIDO kill. Lieutenant Junior Grade Philip Boudinette, flying a PBY-5A Catalina flying boat from Patrol Squadron 84 based at Reykjavik, Iceland, was on patrol over the North Atlantic east of Cape Farewell, Greenland, when he spotted a submarine on the surface. Historical records indicate the target was most likely U-640, a Type 7C cruising on the surface to recharge batteries and refresh the air inside the hull. Though some historians have suggested the submarine may have been U-657, which was also lost in the same vicinity around this time. Boudinette immediately began his attack approach. The submarine's lookouts saw the Catalina coming and shouted warnings to the bridge. The captain ordered a crash dive, and within seconds the submarine was slipping beneath the grey Atlantic swells. But Boudinette had practiced this exact scenario. He released his FIDO at the precise moment and altitude specified in his briefing. The weapon splashed into the water, acquired the sound of the submarine's propellers, and began its pursuit. The explosion followed within a minute. The submarine went down with all 49 hands. There were no survivors, no witnesses, no evidence of what had killed them. Over the following months, FIDO kills mounted steadily as more aircraft and squadrons received the weapon, and crews gained experience with its deployment. The weapon proved particularly devastating against U-boat resupply operations, which became a priority target for Allied hunter-killer groups. The German Navy operated several Type 14 submarines, massive vessels known as Milchkuh or milk cow submarines, which carried extra fuel, torpedoes, and supplies to extend the range of combat U-boats. Without these resupply submarines, the smaller Type 7s could not operate effectively in the distant waters of the South Atlantic and Indian Ocean. These resupply rendezvous required both submarines to surface simultaneously, the tanker and the combat boat connecting with hoses and lines to transfer diesel fuel, fresh water, and torpedoes. The operation took hours to complete and left both vessels vulnerable. American hunter-killer groups, operating from escort carriers and guided by ultra-code-breaking intelligence to the exact coordinates of planned rendezvous points, would catch the submarines on the surface. The moment the U-boats detected approaching aircraft and began their dives, FIDO was waiting for them. The escort carrier, USS Card, compiled one of the most impressive anti-submarine records of the war. Her air group and escorting destroyers destroyed 11 German submarines in total during multiple Atlantic cruises. Many of these kills came from Composite Squadron 9, whose Avenger torpedo bombers became experts in FIDO deployment tactics. The pilots of these squadrons flew mission after mission across the trackless Atlantic, hunting for any sign of U-boat activity, ready to drop their secret weapon at a moment's notice. On October 4, 1943, Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Stearns of Composite Squadron 9 stumbled upon an extraordinary sight north of the Azores. 4 surfaced U-boats were conducting a refueling operation in broad daylight. U-264, U-422, U-455, and the Type 14 tanker U-460 were all clustered together, connected by fuel lines, as the tanker replenished the combat boats. Stearns could scarcely believe his luck. Such a concentration of targets was almost unheard of. The submarines spotted the approaching Avenger and opened fire with their anti-aircraft guns while frantically preparing to dive. Machine gun tracers arced towards Stearns as he pressed his attack through the flak. He radioed for reinforcements and continued circling, watching the submarines disconnect their fuel lines and begin submerging. 3 more Avengers from Card arrived within minutes, their pilots eager to join the attack. As the submarines dove one by one, the aircraft dropped their FIDOs into the churning water. The pilots could only watch and wait as the weapons descended beneath the surface and began their hunts. A gunner aboard one of the Avengers was watching through his camera hatch when he saw something remarkable. A torpedo wake was visible just beneath the surface, tracking steadily toward where U-422 had disappeared. He watched the FIDO close the distance and then saw a massive geyser of water, oil, and debris erupt from the ocean. The torpedo had struck the submarine between the conning tower and stern, blowing the hull apart. Both U-460 and U-422 were destroyed in the attack. The tanker U-460 went down with 62 of her 64-man crew. U-422 was lost with all 49 hands. The other 2 submarines, U-264 and U-455, managed to escape with damage, but the refueling operation was shattered. Without fuel from the tanker, the surviving boats would have to cut their patrols short and return to base in France. On October 12, 1943, another dramatic engagement unfolded. Lieutenant Junior Grade Letson Balliet, known to his squadron mates as Sam, spotted U-488 refueling U-402 in the mid-Atlantic. His radio man saw the submarines from 1.5 miles away, 2 dark shapes connected by hoses on the grey water. Balliet banked hard toward the targets, his heart racing as he prepared his attack run. But there was a problem. U-488, the tanker, was fully surfaced and showed no signs of diving. Balliet knew his FIDO was useless against a surface target. At 12 knots, the torpedo could not catch a submarine, making 17 knots on the surface. He armed his 500-pound bomb instead, preparing for a conventional attack run. As he approached, the U-boat crews finally spotted his Avenger bearing down on them. The lookouts shouted alarms and the submarines began emergency dives. In the span of seconds, Balliet had to make a split decision. The tanker was going under. Should he switch back to FIDO? He made the switch, but now he faced another problem. He was coming in too fast and at the wrong angle. He would overshoot the diving submarine before he could release his weapon. In a display of extraordinary airmanship that his instructors would have declared impossible, he lowered his landing gear and full flaps, while simultaneously skidding the Avenger radically from side to side. The aircraft shuddered violently and nearly plunged into the sea as it bled off speed without gaining altitude. At the last possible moment, he retracted everything, corrected his course, and dropped his FIDO into the swirl of the diving boat. The torpedo splashed into the water and began its search pattern. Balliet circled overhead, watching for any sign of success. But after several minutes, no explosion came. The FIDO had failed to acquire its target, probably because the submarine had escaped beyond the weapon's detection range before homing could begin. Both U-488 and U-402 escaped that day. The next morning, October 13th, Balliet found U-402 again, and this time his FIDO struck true. The submarine went down with all 50 of her crew. U-488 survived until April 1944, when she was finally destroyed by another hunter-killer group. The most dramatic FIDO engagement of the entire war was the sinking of the Japanese submarine, I-52, on the night of June 23rd to June 24th, 1944. I-52 was no ordinary submarine. She was a large Type C-2 cargo submarine, part of Japan's desperate Yanagi missions to maintain secret trade with Nazi Germany. Her cargo was extraordinary, 2.2 tons of gold in 146 bars, along with strategic metals including tin and tungsten, 2 tons of raw opium, and other valuable materials. She also carried 14 technical passengers, engineers and scientists, traveling to Europe to study German weapons technology, including jet engines and rocket designs. American codebreakers in both the Atlantic and Pacific had been tracking I-52's voyage since she departed Japan in March 1944. The submarine had traveled more than 15,000 miles across the Pacific and around the Cape of Good Hope, finally approaching her rendezvous point in the mid-Atlantic. Intercepted radio traffic revealed the exact coordinates where she would meet German submarine U-530 to receive a radar detector and navigation assistance for the final approach to occupied France. The escort carrier, USS Bogue, and her hunter-killer group were vectored to intercept. On the night of June 23rd, I-52 surfaced at the rendezvous point and made contact with U-530. The Germans transferred a Naxos radar detector, an Enigma cipher machine, and 3 specialists. 2 radio operators named Kurt Schulze and Rolf Berendt climbed aboard, along with liaison officer Kapitän-Leutnant Alfred Schaefer. These men would guide the Japanese submarine through the heavily patrolled Bay of Biscay approaches. At 23:40 hours, Lieutenant Commander Jesse Taylor's Avenger from Composite Squadron 69 detected a radar contact. He dropped sonobuoys, acoustic listening devices that floated on the surface, and transmitted underwater sounds to the aircraft by radio. Through his headphones, Taylor heard the distinctive churning of submarine propellers. The target was diving. Taylor laid a pattern of depth charges to force the submarine deeper and ensure it could not evade by reversing course. Then he released his FIDO into the water. Through his sonobuoy receivers, he heard the torpedo splash down and begin its search pattern. Seconds later came the sound of an explosion, followed immediately by the unmistakable grinding and cracking sounds of a submarine hull collapsing under pressure. He had scored a direct hit. Post-war acoustic analysis by the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed that Taylor's FIDO was the weapon that destroyed I-52. The next morning, the destroyer USS Janssen arrived at the attack coordinates. Her crew found a spreading oil slick and debris field containing a ton of raw rubber, bales of silk, and human remains floating on the Atlantic surface. There were no survivors. All 112 souls aboard I-52 had perished, including the 95 Japanese crew, the 14 Japanese technical passengers, and the 3 German specialists who had boarded just minutes before the attack. The 2.2 tons of gold settled to the ocean floor. The wreck of I-52 was not located until May 1995, when maritime researcher Paul Tidwell and the Meridian Sciences Corporation, later known as Nauticos, used modern sonar technology to find her resting at a depth of over 17,000 feet. The original wire recordings of the attack, made through Lieutenant Commander Taylor's sonobuoy equipment, survive in the National Archives. They represent one of the most complete acoustic records of a submarine sinking in existence. By the war's end, the statistics told a remarkable story. According to the Navy's Operations Evaluation Group Study Number 289, compiled in August 1946 from classified operational records. 340 Mark. 24 torpedoes were launched in combat operations. Of these, 204 were launched specifically against submarines, 142 by American aircraft, and 62 by British and Canadian aircraft. The results were devastating to Axis submarine forces. 37 submarines were confirmed sunk by FIDO attack, including 31 German U-boats and 6 Japanese submarines. An additional 18 submarines were confirmed damaged, 15 German and 3 Japanese. The kill rate worked out to approximately 18% per torpedo launched against submarines. When damaged submarines were included, the hit rate rose to approximately 27%. These figures were extraordinary compared to conventional aircraft dropped depth charges, which achieved only about 9.5% effectiveness in attacks on submarines. FIDO was roughly twice as lethal as any other air-dropped anti-submarine weapon in the Allied arsenal. The weapon was so effective that the original production order was substantially reduced. The Navy had initially planned to order 10,000 units, but with U-boat losses mounting and the weapon proving more lethal than expected, production capacity was needed for other programs. Only about 4,000 FIDOs were ultimately manufactured. At a unit cost of approximately $1,800, each weapon represented an extraordinary return on investment. A single torpedo costing less than $2,000 could sink a submarine worth millions and kill a trained crew that had taken years to develop. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of FIDO's story is what the Germans never learned about it. Throughout the war, Germany's own scientists and engineers developed acoustic torpedoes, most notably the G7ES Zonkoenig, known to the Allies as the German Naval Acoustic Torpedo. This weapon entered service in September 1943 and initially caused considerable panic among Allied convoy escorts. Ships were attacked from below by torpedoes that seemed to follow them regardless of evasive maneuvers. The weapon homed on propeller noise just as FIDO did, though it was designed to attack surface ships rather than submarines. Within weeks, however, Allied scientists had analyzed captured weapons and conducted German prisoner interrogations to understand how the Zonkoenig worked. They developed a simple but effective countermeasure called Foxer, a noise-making device towed behind ships on a long cable. The Foxer produced more noise than the ship's own propellers, decoying the German acoustic torpedoes away from their intended targets and causing them to explode harmlessly in the wake. But Germany never developed any countermeasure against FIDO. They never knew it existed. No recovered weapon, no captured document, no prisoner interrogation ever revealed to German naval intelligence that the Allies possessed an air-dropped acoustic homing torpedo. The submarines struck by FIDO simply disappeared without trace, their crews lost with all hands, leaving no survivors to describe what had killed them. The weapon's silence was, in every sense, its defining characteristic. German naval intelligence analyzed U-boat losses obsessively throughout the war, trying to understand why so many submarines were being destroyed. They correctly identified several factors: improved Allied radar, better tactics, more long-range aircraft, broken codes. But they attributed individual losses to lucky depth charge drops or successful surface attacks. They never suspected that a self-guiding weapon was hunting their submarines beneath the waves. FIDO's strategic significance extended far beyond its direct kill count. The weapon arrived at precisely the moment when the Battle of the Atlantic hung in the balance. Its introduction coincided with and amplified several other technological advances that together made mid-1943 the decisive turning point of the naval war. Very long-range liberators closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, the region beyond the range of land-based aircraft, where U-boats had previously operated with near impunity. Centimetric radar, operating on wavelengths invisible to German METOX receivers, caught submarines by surprise on the surface. Escort carriers fielded hunter-killer groups that could pursue U-boats aggressively rather than simply defending convoys. Ultra-intelligence from broken Enigma codes revealed U-boat positions and patrol patterns. High-frequency direction finding allowed convoys to locate and avoid wolfpack concentrations. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Donitz acknowledged defeat and withdrew his wolfpacks from the North Atlantic convoy routes. He would send them back in the autumn with new weapons and tactics, including acoustic torpedoes and improved anti-aircraft armament, but the U-boat arm never recovered its former dominance. The initiative had passed irrevocably to the Allies. In this decisive turn, FIDO played a crucial supporting role. The technology that made FIDO possible did not disappear with the war's end. Instead, it became the foundation of every American lightweight anti-submarine torpedo developed in the following decades. The Mark 27, nicknamed Cutie and introduced in 1944, adapted FIDO's passive homing system for submarine launch. This gave American submarines the ability to attack Japanese anti-submarine vessels by homing on their propeller noise. Approximately 1,100 were produced during the war, with another 3,000 of an improved variant manufactured afterward. The Mark 32, entering fleet service around 1950, became the Navy's first active homing anti-submarine torpedo. Rather than listening passively for target noise, it sent out its own sonar pulses and homed on the echoes, a more reliable but also more complex approach. The Mark 43, entering service around 1951, was the first lightweight torpedo suitable for helicopter deployment, extending anti-submarine warfare to rotary wing aircraft. The Mark 44 became NATO's standard lightweight anti-submarine torpedo, with over 10,000 produced for American service alone, plus additional units manufactured under license by Allied nations. The lineage continues to the present day. The Mark 46, introduced in 1965, brought deep diving capability and higher speed to the lightweight torpedo inventory. It remains in service today in its Mod 5 variant, a testament to the soundness of the basic design. The current Mark 54, nicknamed Mako, represents the latest evolution of this lineage. It incorporates sophisticated digital signal processing and modern propulsion technology, but its fundamental concept, a self-guiding weapon that hunts submarines by their acoustic signature, traces directly back to FIDO's 4 piezoelectric hydrophones listening for propeller cavitation in 1943. The institutional legacy proved equally enduring. When Harvard University insisted that all classified research cease after the war ended, the Underwater Sound Laboratories Associate Director, Dr. Eric Walker, faced a difficult choice. The Navy needed continued torpedo research, but Harvard would no longer host it. Walker accepted a position at Penn State University in 1945 and brought approximately 60 to 100 engineers, scientists, and technicians with him. There they established the Ordnance Research Laboratory, which became the Navy's primary torpedo technology center for the following decades. Today, the organization is known as the Applied Research Laboratory and continues to develop underwater weapons and acoustic systems for the American military. The Naval Undersea Museum in Keyport, Washington, displays an original Mark 24, one of the few surviving examples of this historic weapon. FIDO did not win the Battle of the Atlantic by itself. No single weapon ever wins a war alone. Victory came from the combination of many factors: technological innovation, tactical adaptation, intelligence breakthroughs, industrial mobilization, and human courage and sacrifice on both sides. But FIDO represented something genuinely new in naval warfare. It was the first true smart weapon of the undersea domain, a torpedo that could think for itself, hunt its prey without human guidance, and turn a fleeing submarine into a trapped target. The 37 submarines destroyed by FIDO represent more than machines sent to the ocean floor. Each submarine carried approximately 50 men. Each loss meant 50 letters that would never be written home, 50 families that would receive the dreaded telegram, 50 names added to the rolls of the missing. War extracts such prices from all who participate. The crews of these submarines were young men, many barely out of their teens, serving their countries according to their understanding of duty and honor. They died in the cold darkness of the ocean depths, struck by a weapon they never saw and never understood. The Japanese submarine 152 still rests on the ocean floor, nearly 3 miles beneath the Atlantic surface, her gold cargo scattered among the wreckage. The German U-boats sunk by FIDO lie scattered across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, and the waters around the Azores. They are silent memorials to a secret war fought beneath the waves. The men who died aboard them took the mystery of their destruction to their graves, never knowing that a weapon disguised as a mine, developed by scientists at Harvard and Bell Labs, powered by an ordinary electric motor, and nicknamed after a faithful hunting dog, had tracked them through the darkness and ended their war with technology decades ahead of its time. That is the true story of FIDO, the first acoustic homing torpedo, the weapon that hunted U-boats beneath the waves, the secret that Germany never discovered.